Welcome back to the Hollow Path podcast. And here for our back to school edition, we are very pleased to welcome Vic Hyland, who is a friend of long date and somebody with whom I have very often had conversations on his podcast. In fact, it is a perennial invitation, it would seem. We just cannot quit each other. Vic and I have had some brilliant conversations, and this time I am really pleased to have him on to talk about his new book, which has just come out, and in which he manages to sum up a life's work and so many absolutely fascinating things that really encapsulate many of the conversations and threads that we have drawn out together. Vic is a longtime musician, music teacher, songwriter, magician. He is somebody who is very well versed in the worlds of NLP, Neuro Linguistic Programming, as well as mediumship and spirit channeling, and really a Renaissance man for the ages. Vic, you're very welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. That's really good, Mark. I don't normally do that. So, that's great. Lovely to speak to you.
Yeah, it's been a while, and it's wonderful to see you coming out with this book now because, as I said, I just happen to have open in front of me, which is very in keeping with the spirit of the book, page 15, and the line is, "This book attempts to weave these threads into a spider's web, connecting music back to archaic sources of magical potency, from religious music and its folk roots through to blues, flamenco, Latin and shamanic traditions." And it really does. I love this idea that it is a web that is woven and that it manages to incorporate all these threads. And I found myself really reading it and going, oh, wow, this is all that cool stuff that we talk about and have talked about. What was the inspiration for writing the book, apart from your entire life, obviously?
Yeah. I went through a period of time. Well, first of all, this book has been in the process of being constructed or arriving for at least 10 years, probably longer, because I was doing a blog and some of the things that are in here started as a blog.
Yeah.
And they were sort of like rambling thoughts that I was, things that I'd seen with teaching and I was exploring, and things that I'd come across with regard to sort of NLP, where, under hypnosis, you see people do things, or you realize that how we structure, how we see the world is is more fluid than we realize. So I've been involved in sort of the creative part of teaching, getting people to songwrite, getting people to play in a band. Over the years, I've not only have I played, but I've coached bands. And I was trying to sort of put that together in a way that was, would inspire people to do their own thing.
Yeah.
So I'm not sort of saying this is the way to do it. I am the expert, because I have quite a low opinion of experts.
Yes. I understand, and I think
you are the brown expert.
Yes.
So
yes.
That's the sort of positive thing.
What struck me reading the book was that it was, as you say, it's not didactic in the sense that it doesn't say this is the way. It shows you doing it like it is a sort of a, as we just discussed earlier before we hit record, it's a kind of a performative act. Like, you show the process in the actual writing of the book, but you don't say this is what you must do. You give people a toolbox. You say, here's a bunch of tools you could use. Here's a bunch of, and what's really interesting too, this is not just a book, this is an experience. It's an experiential thing in which you learn by doing, because there are exercises, there are thought experiments, as you call them, and they are fascinating and provocative and stimulating, and the book itself, as you say, kind of enacts this process that you're talking about of creativity and of pulling together the threads and tugging on different threads to see what comes out. It's very much a kind of a right to see what happens approach, which I love. And I think you can see you doing it in the book, and you can see you giving an account of your own process as it has been through your life, and then as it has developed and refined. So I see several different levels of story. Like in some ways, it's kind of a memoir as well. Like you give us, between the threads, one of what they call in French the fil conducteur, which is the conducting wire. The red thread that runs through it is really your own life story.
Yes.
And your own story of becoming who you are.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I don't have a plan. It's one of these things I've read, and also I've discovered that when I've been doing a lot of the podcasting, that the people who do really well don't have a plan. Things arrive. That's not to say that you don't know what direction you're going in.
Can I just stop you there for a sec, because that's a lovely concept that you come up with. One must have direction, but not a destination. You know which way you're going, but you don't know where you're going to end up. And that's gorgeous. Exactly. That's gorgeous. I love that.
Well, it's only because I think there is a problem with thinking.
Oh, yes, there is.
So what tends to happen is that we set parameters as soon as we start to think or believe in something in a particular way. Now, there's a whole thing about belief, which obviously you would know very well from the point of view of how you could use a belief system to do things.
Yes.
But you have to be sort of tricksterish about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But a lot of people, and I see this all the time about people coming in and believing that they can't play.
Yeah.
If you believe in something enough, it starts to affect your, whether you can do something.
Yeah.
So in other words, it does set parameters around.
But again, belief as a tool, and rather than as an article of faith. Like, it's not
exactly.
If you believe in something and you believe in it so strongly, let's say a worldview or ideology or religion, anything that comes along and contradicts it is going to shake your sense of self. Whereas if you adopt beliefs or use beliefs or like develop beliefs, it's like, right, today we're going to believe,
exactly.
For example, that I'm a brilliant songwriter, and then I will be one.
Exactly.
In a way, because I will at least have changed my own orientation towards the problem, right?
Exactly. So that's the sort of chaos magic approach, right?
Absolutely, yeah, like belief shifting, paradigm shifting, and
exactly.
Perhaps just another little quote from the foreword. This book explores aspects of creativity in music, both logically and mythically. The creative arena of thought is a wild, dreamlike terrain that is vast, strange, and dynamic. Consciousness, the hard problem for science, wants to map this landscape logically, but to do so is like grasping smoke. Our predecessors knew this, so they used myth, metaphor, and symbolism to explore and describe its terrain. Now, this is really, really great. And this is what you were just saying, right? There's a problem with thinking.
Yes.
And it is the problem. It's the hard problem. It's consciousness.
It is the hard problem.
We still don't understand what it is or how it works. And if we try to map it, as in like write down, set in stone, this is what it is, it's evanescent, it's the smoke, you can't. But you can describe it.
Yes.
And here, this is what you do, like through your use of myth, metaphor, symbolism, you can give an account of the terrain that can help somebody who comes after you, but not necessarily somebody who's following your exact path. It can help somebody to, I think you used the concept of pathfinding at one point. What's pathfinding?
Yes. Right, okay, so there are certain things that seem to be elements that make us human. I like to sort of think about that, our one of our problems as being we're social creatures that think we're individuals.
Yeah, very good.
So there's certain elements that make us sociable. And some of those things are good and some of them are bad. We'll talk about that at some point, I'm sure. But we also need a way of mapping. I've used that word before, but let's look at this from the point of view of how, if you landed in a place that you'd never seen before, you will map it by, there's the post office, or there's the, whatever.
Yeah. And
then you start to work out where the other places are in relationship.
Right.
Things, right? So we map. And I think certainly in our conversations before, I mentioned that I dowse. And dowsing is an interesting thing because you can dowse on a map.
Yes.
So maps are very strange things. So a physical map, when you turn that, the real world into a diagram,
right,
has a energy of its own, which is very odd, very strange.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I love maps. Like, no shade on maps, right? But I mean, the famous sort of dictum is the map is not the territory,
it's not the
right?
territory.
Like the map is a schematic. As everybody who has ever gotten confused on the London Underground, where they went 5 stops, they thought, and then they came out and they were only 300 meters from where they were to begin with, because the map doesn't reflect topography. The map is a schematic that allows you to navigate the underground. It doesn't show you where things are, it shows you how to get there.
Exactly.
Exactly. And I mean, that's fascinating because, yeah, like what you're saying is that when you are sort of airdropped into foreign territory, which I mean, basically is where we are every day, all the time, right? We are constantly being airdropped into unknown country, which is the future. And how do you orient yourself? Well, you find landmarks, you find points of reference, and none of them are important except in relation to each other. Because you can't say like, well, there's a mountain, and so that's how you find your way. No, there's a mountain, but on the east side of the mountain, there's a river, and then on the, and you start to orient yourself. I'm a big fan of working with directions and elements and so on, and because of course then when you've got a map, which is a series of symbols on paper or whatever, if you start to ascribe symbolic value other than reference to the material world, to the symbols on the map, and then, or you can look around and say, right, I'm going to ascribe symbolic value to the landmarks, and I'm going to ascribe symbolic value to, and then immediately you're into that process that you described, whereby you are kind of picking elements, right? Because there's always a selection. You're picking, you're editing, you're grabbing things, ascribing them symbolic value, remixing them, and creating then a narrative. And I think that's kind of, so you could, there's a point here where you talk about how to make a song out of, just what you come across, and you're just walking around, and you could just be like seeing things and turning it into a song. And I think that's it, in a sense, this is a guide to a very creative and symbolic and even spiritual approach to songwriting. But I think that one can, songwriting's your thing, but somebody like me, I write poetry, and I'm going to read this book. And even if I never pick up a guitar or never sing a song, this book is useful to me because it also shows me how I could use these techniques to write a poem.
Oh, yeah.
But even if you're not somebody who makes art of any kind, I think it also shows you that, well, it's also an approach to just how you go about your day. If I'm my morning walk, I can just be walking along with my headphones on and worrying about, my taxes, or I can be looking at everything I come across and turning my walk into a narrative.
Exactly. So the point here, talking about the poetry thing first.
Yeah.
I do a couple of sort of hippie type festivals in Sussex where I'll do something about songwriting, magical songwriting, and first of all, I'll start with the standard sort of cut up thing, which is taking phrases out of magazines. I don't literally cut magazines up. I just get people to.
You could.
Yeah, but that's how originally that was done.
Well, why don't you just quickly tell us that? Because I think some people listening will hear cut up and they'll know exactly what you mean. But some people will be like, what is cut up? What is that as a technique?
So William S. Burroughs and Brion Gysin, who sort of really use this technique, and it's sort of like creating a montage of things, right? But randomly. So Burroughs would take phrases out of magazines. He'd cut up the magazine and then take something out, pin it on a notice board, and then take another bit and sort of randomly put them together. So what I do is I just get people to dip into the, you could go, just take a look, and just go, stories are worth hearing. So on another page, make music again. And then another one, Joe's eyes started to tear up. And
we need one more line. We need one more line for the quatrain.
Okay. A sequence usually occurs when lighting a fire.
Oh, see now that you've got a verse of a song.
Absolutely.
And it's beautiful, actually.
Yeah. Okay. So when I do that in these talks, and I read out this long list of things that people have put together, I might have 20 or 30 people with magazines, just, using their phones or whatever.
Yeah.
And I read it out. It is poetry.
Yeah.
It's a poetic, because they're phrases and they're juxtaposed.
Exactly.
Your unconscious creative part of yourself has to create a pattern. It just is what we do. We're pattern seekers. That's another point. So we're map makers, we're pattern seekers, and we're storytellers.
Absolutely. And if I can just, jump in with my sort of something it makes me think of, because we make patterns, we draw connections. So my background would have been more in sort of literature, literary theory, art theory, very interested always in art movements. And what this makes me think of is surrealist techniques and Dada techniques, right? From the
I was going to say Dada,
right?
Yeah.
Right, because Tristan Tzara, the Dadaist sort of Dadaist Pope, anti-Pope, one of his things was spontaneous poetry, in which they would cut up words and phrases and put them into a hat and draw them out at random. And so what you'd be doing was you had a random generator for poetry, but they did it as a performance. Like he would do it like a magician, like he'd stand on a stage with the hat and be pulling out the phrases. And as you said, when you do this in front of an audience, I bet people are shocked by how much meaning there seems to be. In fact, to the point where they're like, that can't be random.
No.
But the point is, as you say, it's that we don't accept that any combination of symbols is random, and therefore we create the meaning. It just happens, like it's just natural. And the other one is, the exquisite corpse exercise. So this is where it's a party game. It's a surrealist party game. And they would get sheets of paper, and each person would write a line and then fold it over and then pass it on, and write another line and then fold it over and pass it on. And what you get is this poem, each line of which is written by a different person who hadn't seen what went before. And I had a teacher in first year college in my French department who was telling us about this, and she got the whole class to do it. She got everybody to write a little piece of poetry, and then she took them and she remixed them and created this epic surrealist poem out of the unconscious of the entire class. And everyone was kind of like, what just happened? Because but she was one of those people. She was one of those challenging, scary, weird people who would take her first year students and shock them with poetry. you know. At the beginning of her lectures on UNESCO, who's the absurdist theater maker, we'd all come in and we'd all be kind of chit-chatting and stuff. Big lecture hall, like 200 people. And she picked up a big stick from behind the lectern and she smacked it 3 times on the lectern, and everybody shut up. And we all looked at her. And then she said, and that is how they announce the beginning of the play. You know, and suddenly she has propelled us into a theatrical space. She has propelled us, she has got our attention, but she has also done basically a kind of an opening ceremony, which has put us in a charged space of narrative and performance. Absolutely brilliant. She's one of my favorite teachers that I've ever had. So,
that sounds brilliant.
You know, Judy Kravis, if you ever hear this, I still remember your lessons. But you can do that, I think. You can shock people into poetry and shock people into performance and that kind of liminal space of theatricality. You talk about that too, and let's sort of just jump to that topic as it comes up. Hedgerows.
Yes.
Tell me about hedgerows. As you know, I'm big into hedges. I'm a big fan of hedges and hedge schools and hedge wizards and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, so there's a number of things about this, because obviously I forage. And foraging is an all year round occupation, even if you're not collecting things, because you're looking for things. You're keeping your eyes open. And the reason I think that is, as an aside, is...
One second, sorry, just, I don't know if you can hear this, but very ironically, there is literally somebody with a weed whacker cutting the hedge across the road. And I hope the sound doesn't, I'm like, bloody hell,
no, I can't hear
come
it,
on. You know, that's a bit too on the nose, isn't it? There's a guy trimming the hedges as we speak.
Right.
But we would rather not. We would rather let them flourish because...
Okay, so the thing is that when you're out looking at, you know, that is the thing that you do. It changes the way you think. And you start to see that actually most of the things are natural phenomena. There's lots of processes that we go through which are completely natural phenomena. We can draw, you know, the idea of it. Well, for instance, an idea is like a seed, right?
Yeah.
And if you think about how a seed germinates and what it needs and everything, it's exactly the same as an idea. It needs the right environment. It needs the right ecosystem to be in. It needs the right amount of, you know, heat and water. You know, in other words, you've got to feed the thing.
Yeah.
And it takes time. And when it first appears, it might not be what you expect, and all the rest of it. So you can keep drawing this analogy with.
And I could, for example, if I wanted to make my spin on it, you know, which is relevant to my life or my process, I'd say, yeah. And also, it's buried. It starts off buried.
Yes.
It germinates in darkness.
In darkness. Exactly.
And you cannot see it to begin with.
Exactly.
But you still have to like water that ground and nurture that ground and give it the space. And then, you know, what comes to mind for me as well, because I am a walking library of bibliomancy, is Dylan Thomas, you know, the force that drives the green fuse through the flower. That's creativity.
Yes.
You know?
Yes, it is.
And it is a natural process, as you said.
We're going to come back to bibliomancy in a minute. Yeah. Obviously.
Well, you already just did, so, you know.
Exactly. So the thing about hedgerows is that they're sort of liminal spaces anyway, because they're in between things.
Right.
But of course, you get the high concentration of stuff going on there. There's a lot of things going on in a hedgerow that's not going on in the field.
True. Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that you can look at with regard to a hedgerow. You know, what's in a hedgerow? What type of, you know, if you go to a traditional hedgerow, what type of plants would have been in there, would have been placed in there? And they tend to be the type of plants that Well, they're very therapeutic, a lot of them.
Right.
You'd use the medicine. So you've got things like crampbark, you know, Guelder rose, you've got sloes, you've got hawthorn, you know, so there's, you know, within that, there's heart medicine, there's cramp medicines, medicines for women's period pains,
Right.
you know, and you think, well, that's, you know, it's a medicine chest, and it's there, and if you didn't know about it, you wouldn't think twice. Not only that, it's a place where birds nest.
Birds and small rodents and
Foxes in a big,
foxes,
you know, if you look in, you know, a big sort of overgrown hedgerow, all sorts of things could be living in there.
It is. I mean, it's an absolute bastion of biodiversity, and also, as we know now, land with healthy hedges, it also keeps the soil together,
Solid.
protects it from the wind. And so when people, and I think this is just it, I mean, in Britain and in Ireland, over the last sort of 300 years, thousands, millions of miles of hedgerows have been dug out and dug up, and so that they could make big open fields which were more efficient for the monoculture. And it is such a perfect metaphor for capitalism, you know, the enclosure of the commons and then the removal of the hedgerows, so that they have more space, and then so that the machines can go and do the crop, whatever. But what people have discovered, and I know this because I've read about people in both in Britain and in Ireland who are now specialists in putting back the hedges, like they are hedge planters, because people have realized, well, it gives the animals shade and shelter, it gives the animals moisture and coolth, it gives the crops pollinators, it gives everything. And it strikes me to say that all of the fields, everything in the field, everything in the meadow is tied together by the hedges, because the hedges are the seams. You know, everything is sewn together by the seams, which are the hedges that run through and throughout. And they also give, you know, the hedge and the ditch are a great place to pass unseen, not just for animals, but for people. And to go through the hedge, you know, because on this side of the hedge, it might be farmland, but sometimes the hedge is what stands between us and the wilderness. And so passing through the hedge and crossing the hedge, you know, as you know very well, is one of the central metaphors of witchcraft and of resistance.
Yeah.
Hedge crossing, being able to go back and forth between this reality and the other.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, so that's, you know, hedges, when you look at that, you think, okay, this idea of confining things into an area. Because of the creative process, you need to do that at the end. You need to structure something.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that you could look at and think, well, yeah, it's all very well just having a song that lasts for 20 minutes in the, you know, in the sort of prog rock style where, you know, it's an endless ramble.
Yeah.
In actual fact, that doesn't really work very well.
No.
Sometimes it does, but not very often.
No, but I mean, it's certainly fun, like to do yourself. And you could kind of think about it like also going for a walk in the countryside, right? Going on a ramble, you know, just like wandering. But if you want to communicate it to other people or to get somewhere, you're going to have to take them on a journey. And just a ramble it's not effective enough.
No.
Because you want to get it out there and you want to say to people, I'm going to take you from A to B and then A to Z, you know, and not just meander. But the meandering is a great way to figure out.
Yes, it's a different thing, isn't it?
And that's where you go and forage, right? That's where you go and gather and collect.
Yes. And because the thing about foraging is that you may have a good idea of where something might be. And then certain things, you know, there probably are going to be there, but certain other things you have no idea whether they're going to be there, like mushrooms, for instance.
Yeah.
I'm not a great sort of expert on mushrooms, I must say, but you can't sort of think, okay, I'm going to go there and there's going to be such and such thing, because there might not be. Right, because they're much more sort of tricky things to find. But generally speaking, it's a relationship.
Yeah.
So the whole thing of that, that type of, it's a way of thinking. That's the thing about this locking into natural processes, because that's how we would have thought.
Yeah.
So when you were talking about songs and maps and all the rest of it, of course, at one point in time, they would have been the same thing. And in some cultures, they are the same thing. So
yes,
songlines,
yeah,
it helps you navigate the land, but it also tells you all about the land. And it also tells you about all the secrets of the land. And it's also a sort of a reverence for the things that are there. It's reminding the world outside ourselves that we still have a relationship with them. So all that sort of stuff would have been going on with song. And there's some sort of remnants of that. You can sort of hear it in certain things, but it's not generally how we do stuff anymore.
No. But sorry. But as you point out, and you give us, some of this history in quite a quick way, like, touching on the major points, but the way that music in the Western world has developed, all of those strata, that substrate of ways of singing and singing your way into things, like it's all still there. And like, just because there's layers and layers and layers and layers of post-production that have been added, but the fundamental things, I think, as you say, it's a way of finding your way through a landscape. Like a song could teach you a path, right? And the song lines, the Australian Aboriginal song lines, more than just a set of directions, are a complete sort of situating of yourself in relation to the landscape and what it does and how it functions and how you function in it. And I think also, you mentioned this in the book, there's a lot of cultures, a lot of religions in which the world is begun with the word, and indeed with the song, that the world is sung into being. And I think, for me, this is a kind of a phrase that comes back over and over. That idea of singing the world into being is something that we can do in our active co-creation every day. That when we look and name and turn the elements around us of our sensible world into a narrative, we are once again singing it into being around us. And I often think of the connection between that and the word enchantment, which means ensinging. We are ensinging the world. And so when we teach or preach or share these ways of singing, that is an act of radical re-enchantment.
Yes, it is. And I mean, if you think, you're only going to look at words and they tell you something deeper, obviously, like you're saying, enchantment.
Yeah.
Chanting. But of course, the word to spell.
Yeah.
And the fact that magical books are called grimoires.
Absolutely.
So grammar. So we know the power of words unconsciously. When you were talking about the fields and people ripping up hedgerows, that is a perfect metaphor for, we'll call it the left side of the brain, the sort of analytical thing. And of course, most of the problems that we have are caused by somebody having a great idea.
Yeah.
It's a great idea to have a bigger field so that we can make it more efficient. And then later on, we realize it wasn't a great idea, really. Okay. And that metaphor of simplifying things down, nature's not like that. It's complicated, right? It's a sort of mess of chaos. But the interesting thing is that finds its way into how things are. But as soon as we simplify things down, and we do it all the time,
yeah,
don't we? You know, we come up with the system, and then everything is predicated on that system, and we're doing it now.
And it's not to say that, you know, that we should never schematize and simplify. I mean, that was the mapping thing, right? But only in as much as we know that it is a tool and not the territory. For example, you know, my dad's a mathematician, and he loves the fact that mathematics works, as in it is perfect, but it's a closed system. Like, it doesn't, he says that, oh yeah, mathematics rules the world. And I say, well, yeah, but it doesn't exist. Like, it's ideal and therefore doesn't exist, because there is no such thing as a perfect circle. There is no such thing as, you know, there is no such thing as that kind of Platonic perfection of mathematics. But it doesn't mean we can't use it, because it's very good at approximating, you know, or giving us guidelines.
It's a very good map.
It is a very good map, but it is not the thing.
Yeah.
Now, of course, when you get to the sort of the higher levels of mathematics, where he would try to explain it to me and he would lose me. I mean, there are ways of seeing it where you're like, oh, okay, actually now I see how. For example, when you start talking about chaos theory and fractals and things like that, and how actually, yes, in nature we do see them. You know, when you see a fern fiddlehead before it has expanded and unfurled, you can chart the curves of it with Fibonacci numbers. You know, and so you're like, okay, there are maths. Okay, Dad, you got me. But as you say, when we make things simple with a big idea, an ideology, a way of looking at the world, the danger, of course, is that when we realize that it doesn't perfectly describe the world, because it couldn't, then we either ignore the things that don't fit into our ideology or the worldview we've adopted, or we feel attacked by them, and they disturb us, and we try to stamp them out. And you know, that way lies all extremisms.
Exactly. So you talked about the thing about mathematics.
Yeah.
One of the things that people say about music is it's mathematical.
Yeah.
And actually it's not, it's linguistic. It describes something very well, but it isn't mathematical. And if you play music mathematically, it sounds horrible.
Yes, but where I don't agree with you is that like the physics of music are mathematical, in the sense that, like, you know, a string at a certain level of tension, at a certain, you know, will produce these such and such harmonics and resonances. Now, that's actually more mathematical than most things.
Yes. But the thing is, the essence of music is linguistic.
Tell me why.
Okay. I teach a lot of people improvisation. So you give them the scale. So this is all very mathematical, because that, you know, these intervals have certain relationships to them. And you get people playing the scales up and down and all the rest of it, and then you get them to sort of mess around with them. And it still doesn't sound like music. It just sounds like a load of notes. Until you say to them, okay, what do you have for breakfast? And they go, well, I had cornflakes. And what else did you have? And orange juice. So you go, right, I had cornflakes and orange juice. So use the notes and talk through the guitar. So they start to do that. And then if you say to them, say that again. I had cornflakes and orange juice. And you get them to do it again. Of course, they put the accents in.
Mm-hmm.
So what begins to happen is that those things start to have a spirit to them.
Yeah.
So that's very difficult to do with mathematics.
It is, because...
See, that's the point. It's like the thing that animates.
Yeah.
That's where the essence of it is.
It seems a bit like, you know, the mathematical element is, it's the raw material in a sense. It's the physics of
Yes.
sound, right? But
it's the structure.
What you're saying is, yes, but that's sound. That's how sound works, but that's not music.
No.
But because music tells a story and music has a spirit.
Yes.
And I absolutely loved the way you discussed this in the book. Couple of things, like, for example, the way that a certain chord can have a voice and a feel, and in a kind of a synesthetic way evoke other physical sensations. Like, you know, it can evoke a visible element, or it can evoke a sensory element, a taste element, a touch element, a color, and it does, it seems. Or there was the other thing, which is, so that's kind of one whole aspect, which is, how come a certain chord makes us feel a certain way, or how come a certain combination of rhythm and the note and the tone and the timbre and all this, how come they have this effect on the human body or on the human emotions? And then the other one, and these are two kind of big subjects, is the spirit of a song, and how you talked about the idea that songs, to many people, have been considered to be pre-existing. Like, they don't invent them, they discover them, or even they evoke them. Yes. They call them into the world. So
yes.
Now those are two separate things, but both of them, I don't know if we can talk about them together or consecutively, but it just occurs to me to mention that when I had Amelia Hogan, who you know as well, I think, on, she was one of the first people I had on the podcast, and she is a singer, and she is a sean-nós singer, like the Irish old style, and she talked very much about the idea that when she gives voice to a song on stage or in a performance situation, if she's doing it the soulful way, she's not performing, she's channeling something from somewhere else.
Yeah.
And the song has its own spirit, and she is acting as a conduit between the song and the audience in a kind of like almost like a seance. But she's not talking about writing songs, she's talking about singing songs that are very old, usually. Now, you are talking about how to write the song yourself, but it's the same. You are a conduit to something from elsewhere, and you are bringing it into this world.
Yes.
And if you look at it like that, I think it doesn't matter if that is true. But if you look
No. This is the point. And you might have noticed at the beginning of the book, when I've got the how to use the book,
yes,
there's an addendum that talks about Crowley's Book of Lies.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's an NLP thing, which is, it doesn't matter if it's true or not, does it work?
Yeah, exactly.
And the problem is that some things are unknowable. And the problem with that is that you just have to have a way of using something that you don't really know about.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just sort of think, well, I don't know that, I can't do it. Mm. You know, because otherwise nothing would ever happen, would it? So it doesn't matter whether there's two examples I can give here. Often people have problems where they've created something that they feel protective of the thing, and they can't give it up. And you know, You just produced a book. You'll have the same thing with that. When it goes out there, it's your baby. And if people criticize you, you'll be very upset about it. The trick is to pretend that it's not you.
Yeah.
And you can see why people would write under a pen name, because it actually frees you.
Oh, completely. And
utterly.
To be honest, I will say, you know, and I won't go on about it, but for me, the most liberating thing I ever did as a writer was to start writing as other people, to start creating persona and writing as them, because suddenly I wasn't worried about my ego. I wasn't me. And I think that one of the problems with creativity for all of us is that when we create something, we think, oh, but this has to reflect exactly who I am and what I believe in and everything I think. But that's impossible.
But it's also one part of the brain.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Yeah.
If you see what I'm getting at with all, you know, and I do this thing about the right and left side of the brain because it's just a great metaphor.
Yeah.
You know, whether that's true or not, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
When you start looking at the, you know, the left side of the brain, that, as I said, was a great metaphor about the field.
Yeah.
Right? When you get to the right side of the brain, it's expansive. It doesn't really, you know, it's mythos. It doesn't need to be true. Nothing needs to be true. It's a dream.
Yeah.
And the problem, as soon as the ego comes in, it's like the left side of the brain going, don't forget about me.
Yeah.
I'm slipping away. I don't want to slip away. I want to be here. I want to be, you know, I want to rule everything. I want to be, you know, I want to take over.
But when you pretend,
but when you let go of that,
you know, pretend to be someone else, just to say to yourself, right now, today, I'm going to be this character. And it is so much easier. You're so much less self-conscious. It is so liberating. And in a sense, it is also a form of possession because you are invoking the spirit.
Absolutely a form of possession.
You're invoking a spirit that you have called forth. And then you say, I am now going to speak as this person. And you don't need to think about it. It just happens.
Right. Let me tell you a story.
Please.
My mother was interested in spiritualism. She trained as a medium. So I grew up with that sort of strange environment going on, and it was normal to me. When I became, and I obviously had a skill, right? And I used to have some very strange things happen as a kid, which my mother noticed and, you know, helped me deal with it basically, but not by shutting me down. When I got to a teenager, I decided that, because I'd seen them, you know, mediums working and stuff in spiritualist churches, I had the opportunity to go and sit in a circle, which I did. And I trained up and I became actually quite good. I used to go out on the circuit with mediums and stuff, and as a teenager do stuff. But I was really good at trance. And of course what happens is, you know, whatever it is that happens, right? You get taken over by something. Now, that is an interesting thing because something happens. Now, I'm not saying that you are taken over by Chinaman or whatever. It doesn't really matter. There is a phenomenon.
Yeah.
And Jack Hunter does a lot of stuff with this. There is something going on. Whether it's what we think it is or not, it's neither here nor there. But I was in an NLP training thing with Paul McKenna.
Oh, yeah.
And Paul McKenna, and I think it was Michael Breen, were doing this thing about getting information from your unconscious. So he said, well, we're going to do this little experiment. Is anybody out there interested in sportsmen? You know, and loads of people with their hands up and said, okay, let's choose one. And I thought, there's somebody in the audience where, you know, called out a famous sports person, and somebody put his hand up and said Muhammad Ali. He said, do you fancy coming up and being part of this? So this very tall Indian guy got up, went to the stage, sat down. Paul McKenna put him into a trance and said to him, so under hypnosis, and said, I want your unconscious to find all the information it's got about Muhammad Ali. And he set this thing up where the guy's thumbs would twitch, yes and no. He brought him out of this trance, and it was just like watching Muhammad Ali on a TV program. He sat like Muhammad Ali. He had the patter and everything. It was incredible. And I thought, I've seen that before. I've seen that with mediums. And it was the first time I'd seen that outside of that.
Right.
So I became Muhammad Ali.
I mean,
it was amazing.
That is fascinating. Now, absolutely yes. But what that guy, and McKenna, who for anyone who doesn't know, he's a very, very well-known English hypnotist, right? He was asking him to access all of his subconscious knowledge of Muhammad Ali. And I absolutely believe that this guy in his life could have absorbed enough information and footage, like interviews and whatever, of Ali. He could have absorbed enough information that obviously wasn't like consciously accessible to him, but to do a perfect impression of him, if he was also then disinhibited enough to do that, right? However, in a trance medium channeling situation, what's coming through? Because it's not information that your unconscious has gathered.
I don't know.
Because
I'm not sure.
It would be one thing if you asked to contact the spirit of Muhammad Ali. But what if someone says, can you channel the spirit of my Aunt Kate? And you've never met Kate. So you don't have any information in your subconscious about Kate, or do you?
Well, okay. We're going to go. There's a danger of us going down a rabbit hole here.
Look, we are great navigators of the hedge, and we know that there are rabbit holes and foxholes and all sorts of things. We can poke our stick into them, but let's not disturb them too much.
No, let me just very briefly say this, because obviously I've got some experience of doing that within a spiritualist thing. There is a definite feeling of changing gear, right? I'm not saying that when these people are doing things, they're all changed to the same gear, because I don't think there are. I think there's a multitude of things that we don't understand that we're capable of doing. I don't know what that takes us to. I don't know what those things are. In my own mind, I've got maps that I can think, well, it's probably this or whatever. And again, is the information useful? Right. Is the information accurate? And again, if you're channeling somebody's Aunt Kate, then obviously the information that they give out can be verified, and not necessarily by the person who's actually sitting there. They might have to go away and talk to somebody else to verify it.
Right.
And that's often the thing that is the real clincher.
Exactly.
That makes you go, because is amazing.
You've told them something that they don't even know. So this is nothing to do with cold reading, and this is nothing to do with picking up things the way they've talked about Aunt Kate, whatever. You've said something that is externally verifiable, that not only did you have no way of knowing, but they had no way of knowing. Exactly. So we're on a different channel there. So
yes,
and I really like what you say there about the idea that you could absolutely come up with your theory of how this works. I'm sure, and you have, I'm sure, and many, like, that's a cosmology, right? Like, religions have them, spiritual traditions have them. This is how this works. This is what spirits are. This is what the human soul is. This is how they interact. None of them are actually verifiable. None of them are falsifiable. And therefore, does it work is the only question.
It is.
And does it get you there?
Exactly.
So, I mean, I totally agree. And like, I'm not one of these people who says, all spiritual paths are the same and they're just different ways of expressing the same thing. However, I mean, I guess you could think of them as languages. you know,
Yeah.
a spiritual language. And as we know, languages are not just simply like ways of talking about the world and a grammar. A language is also a way of being in the world, because, you know, in some languages, there are words for things that don't exist in other languages. And if you, as Wittgenstein says, right, the limits of my language are the limits of my world, and that whereof I cannot speak, thereof I must be silent. If we don't have a word for it, we can't really experience it.
No, that's right.
For example, this is one that often strikes people as weird when I tell them. In French, there is no word for loneliness. There is literally no word for that. You can say, I feel alone. You can speak about solitude, like literally the word solitude. There isn't a word for being lonely. Now, that is fascinating, because it kind of means a French person can feel alone, but they don't have the nuance of being lonely. And that is interesting. They can feel isolated. They can feel unsupported. They can feel a lack of connection, but that's not quite the same.
No, it isn't the same.
And also, and this one is also absolutely brilliant. Do you know what the word for humor is in French? It is humour. And it is a loan word from English, because the word humeur is the old, like, sort of, you know, medieval humor, and that means mood in French, right?
Yes.
Mood, or in the old sense, you know, it was like the four humors, the
Humors,
is it Galen who had the
Galen,
melancholy, sanguine, phlegmatic, and bilious? Can't remember. There's another one. The word humeur was like the classical humors, and that became to mean mood. So je suis de mauvaise humeur means I'm in a bad mood. Whereas in England, like, people in Ireland still say, he's in bad humor, you know, to mean he's in a bad mood. But humor came to mean being funny, making jokes. And in the 18th century, people like David Hume came to Paris and were a huge hit in the salons. And one of the reasons they were such a hit was because they were funny and because they were good at telling jokes. And the French were like, what is this English humour? Because in French, you could be witty, you could be amusing, you could tell an anecdote, you could, and they have all sorts of word play and word games and satire, but they weren't humor. And so they now use the English word humour to describe, like, being funny.
Right.
And I just think that is incredible. And it's true. They're not much of a laugh, the French.
No.
I mean, they're brilliant. And I live here.
Yeah. No.
I wouldn't live here if it wasn't for the fact that I love French people, and I love the lifestyle, and I love the mindset in so many ways. But they're not much of a laugh. They're not good crack, you know?
No. Do you think, again, maybe the thing about the English language is that it might be open to humor, because you can pun in ways on so many different levels?
Well, and why is this the case? I would argue that, and this is also why English, I think, is so well suited to humor, but also to poetry, and also to wordplay of all kinds, and also suited to your method, the English language, because it has been so permeable. Like, English is already a remix. English is already a grab bag and a melting pot, because, you know, you've got your Anglo-Saxon kind of base, onto which was grafted the Latin sort of roots, and then some of them were like back formed in the 17th century. Like, they wanted to make more kind of posh sounding words, so they invented Latinate words. And then you've got the whole French influence, and then you've got, you know, so what we get in English is often we'll have a lot of very close synonyms, but they're not quite synonyms. And you'll find that One of them is an Anglo-Saxon root, and one of them is a French root, and one of them is a Latin root, because they're roughly 30%, 30%, 30% of the language. And the Anglo-Saxon one is a kind of an earthy, strong one. Like, for a monarch, we might describe him as kingly, right? And that's a great, like, The French word, we would describe him as royal. And that's like a nice, elegant word.
Yeah.
And then the Latin word is regal, and that is more technical and more, it's more high register. And so we have three words where some languages might only have one, and that applies across the board. And so somebody once brilliantly said, these are my two favorite characterizations of the English language. English is what happens when Norman knights try to flirt with Saxon barmaids.
Yes.
And the result is English.
Yes, that sounds good.
Or English is the kind of language that follows other languages down alleyways and knocks them on the head and goes through their pockets for loose vocabulary.
Yes, that is very true.
So English is just this wonderful, permeable, malleable, changeable, shifting thing. And because there is no academy saying this is what is correct English and this is what is not, the way the French have, like they literally have an academy that decides this is good French, this is not good French. We don't, because we couldn't. It's impossible. There's too many varieties, too many dialects. And it's constantly changing.
It just froze then. I don't know whether you noticed.
No, I didn't. So what I was saying is that we couldn't have an academy of English because there are too many dialects. There are too many jargons and argots and slangs and patois and pidgins. And, you know, that cat is out of the bag. Like, English is no place for a prescriptivist.
No. And there's too many maritime metaphors and phrases like the cat's out of the bag.
Is that maritime?
Yes, it is. It's the cat of nine tails.
Oh, no, that's horrible.
It is. So once the cat's out of the bag, you know what's happening next.
Oh, God, I didn't realize. I thought it was just like, you know, you were trying to bring a cat somewhere and it escaped.
No,
you know?
No, it's a cat of nine tails. There's another maritime.
Well, I mean, absolutely also to do with the fact that the British nation, or the British sort of the islands, like the Ireland and Britain, were such great sailors, you know,
yes.
Partly to go and conquer the hell out of people, but also just to go and explore and trade and, you know, and bring stuff back, including language.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah. This is what I mean. So it's like the whole of that creative process is sort of accidental. You know, the fact that you bring things back and it just happens to be language as well.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, and not only that, of course, it was the easiest way to get around, wasn't it? By water, because England was actually, the British Isles just generally was difficult to get to on land, going from north to south.
Yes.
So in the north, it was easier to go across and communicate with people from Scandinavia than it was to travel all the way down.
Absolutely.
So then obviously we ended up with a few extra characters, like, you know, and their language, the Scandinavian languages and stuff that
I mean, even you know, even within Britain and Ireland, you've got, you know, the amount of languages and cultures and tribes and clans that go to make up it, even at the base, is huge. You've got the Goidelic Celtic languages, and you've got the Brittonic Celtic languages, but multiple, like not just one. And then you've got the Romans, and then you've got all of that kind of like Romano-British culture, which was huge and lasted for several centuries. And you've got and then you've got the Anglo-Saxons, but of course the Anglo-Saxons doesn't exist. It's wave after wave of different Germanic invaders, but also immigrants. And then from the north, several different groups of Scandinavian Norse. You've got the Danish and the Norwegians were the main ones, but so many of them settled in Northern England and Scotland and Ireland even, and gave us parts of our language too. Irish is fascinating that way too, because in Irish, most of the words to do with the church come from Latin or French, but most of the words to do with sailing and with trading come from Old Norse. Our word for market, silver, ship, port, all of those come from the Norse words. In fact, you've heard of a Viking longboat, right?
Yes.
Well, I think, if I'm not mistaken, that's one of those like ATM machine things where it's a tautology, because long is the word for boat.
Oh, right.
And the Irish word for boat is lung. And the Irish word for port is port. And, you know, Wexford in Ireland is actually Vaisfjord, you know?
Right.
Or whatever, you know, this,
Yeah.
like there's one of my favorite whiskies in Scotland is an Islay single malt called Bunnahabhain. And hafen sounds very like the word for port, right? In a Scandinavian word like haven. But if you look at how it's spelt, you're like, oh, Bunnahabhain, you mean Bunnahabhain, which means the mouth of the river in Irish Gaelic. So it's the same word. Like our word for river is Awen. The Norse word for port, like the mouth of the river, is Hafen. But which came first? I don't know.
Yeah.
And it's funny because for us it's the river, for them it's the mouth of the river, because that's where they arrive.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But I mean, it's just what's really interesting too, and this is, I think, back to your book, knowing all of this is amazing, knowing etymology and linguistic history and all of this stuff. But you don't need to be a linguist for it to work.
No.
It doesn't matter. You don't need to know how it works.
No.
Still works.
And the interesting thing is that one of the biggest influences on me in my songwriting was a friend of mine who was in a band with me, a guy called Brian Early. And Brian was in a band called Bravura with me.
Mm-hmm.
And he was very dyslexic, which made him an incredible lyricist. Because what he did was he just chose words because he liked the sound of them and put them together. And it was amazing. And it got you away from that logical thing and you see it in pop music all the time, and it drives me up the wall when there's nothing left to the imagination with the lyrics, because people explain it to you. You think, don't do that. Yeah. It's just nonsense, you know.
Or it's not nonsense enough.
Well,
you know, it's too straight. It's too straightforward. It's too because you know, I think that you said this earlier, and I think that this goes very much along with the person who's dyslexic, or it goes along with all of this. It's juxtaposition of apparently unrelated elements that gives the poetic spark. Because if you say a very straight sentence like "I went to the shop," it's a bald statement of fact. There's nothing really poetic about it. But if you were to break it and throw in something random, like I'm just looking at two objects which are in front of me on my windowsill, and I'll just throw them in, and I'll just say, I went to the sickle cup shop.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh shit, what is that? But I mean, I could talk to you for 5 minutes about the connotations of that very interesting poem.
Yes. Yes. Well, that's the thing, isn't it? You know, and I actually use that thing as tomorrow I'm going to go to the shops as an example. So if you cut that and just went, tomorrow I'm going.
Yeah, of course.
Where are you going? you know, it's suddenly it's like it's
Or
sort of surprising.
this is something else that you say, which is also the power of so there's the power of a declarative statement, like, you know, where you say, I am this, or I do this, like I go to the shop, you know, or tomorrow I will go, or where you tell someone to do something, or but also repetition. What if you were to just say, okay, shop, 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 and suddenly you've got something really weird, you know? Um, there's that thing of like, if you repeat a word enough times, it starts to lose its normal meaning and becomes strange. It's defamiliarized, you know?
It's like all you need is love.
That's what I was thinking of, that passage in your book, right? Go on, tell us
So, well,
what happens in All You Need Is
there's
Love.
a mantra running through that, which is love, 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 right? Okay, so you've got that going on. And then, of course, you've got the play of, you'll obviously be able to tell me what the this technique is that Lennon uses, which is, you know, because you've got all you need is love, all you need is love, all you need is love, love, love is all you need.
Yes.
So you can just look at that and go, that's very clever because you just turned it all around. But that is obviously a technique, you know.
It is, and it's called, I've forgotten the word. But yeah, it's a very,
I know.
It's a powerful technique. It's you know, and there is it'll come back to me in a second. But it's you know, ask not what your country can do for you, what you can do for your country. It's just
so it's a rhetoric. It's
a rhetorical trick of inversion. Like you say the sentence, and then the second half is the mirror image, and it's called, I forget.
Because there's a musical technique for doing that as well. You take a phrase and you turn it upside down.
Yeah.
So inversions and inverse in what's the, again, I can't remember. I can't remember the terms for this. Retrograde, and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, it doesn't. The point is that you could do that without actually knowing that technique.
Of course you can. And the thing is, I think that we do it all the time. Like everybody uses poetry and sound effects, alliteration, rhythm, all of these things. We all do it all the time. But the more conscious you are, now see, this is the trick, right? Because some people will study the theory of how these things work, but that doesn't mean they're good at doing them. Right. They can analyze them, but it doesn't mean they can do them. And one of the hardest things in the world is to learn with the logos, the theory, and then to forget about it and just do it. Because it can be very inhibiting to know how it works. You know? Well,
again, if you think about that, is the technique of spell casting, is it not?
How so?
Well, you do the thing and then forget about it. Right? Yeah. It's the same things with sigils.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, it's
the fact of forgetting is an important point, isn't it?
It is. I mean, some people say so. You know,
I just said so. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
But I mean, I could equally argue to you that no, the important thing is remembering. You know.
Yeah, but on what level? Because you do remember on an unconscious level. That's the whole point.
Well, let me put it this way:
one part of the brain goes somewhere else, doesn't it?
Well, yes, absolutely, and that's kind of what I mean when I was saying, you know, what is it we're forgetting? Well, kind of forgetting the inhibitions, forgetting the inner sensor, becoming open-minded, like letting our mind, our kind of not unconscious, but letting our kind of instinctive mind take over, which is much more it is much more effective if you also do have the structure. Like if you know the structure, if you know how to build the scaffolding, then it's only in that beautiful moment where you take it away and the edifice stands free. You can't see the blueprints anymore. You can't see the planning. You can't see all you see is the thing itself. But I think a lot of people, when they learn techniques, they never get beyond the stage of like building the scaffolding. And they don't know how to take it away. They don't know how to take away the trading wheels, you know? But what I meant was, you know, yes, I totally agree. And I know that with sigil magic, as you say, like, yeah, the idea is that it's fire and forget. And because then it's working in your unconscious, you know, and you're not consciously thinking about it. So it just kind of manifests through that. But the beauty of language and ideas is that I could take the opposite idea, which is remembering, and I could say, no, it's all about remembering, because the point is that we want to use the alchemical formula of solve et coagula, which is that first we must break it down, which is analysis, or which is metabolism. You know, we break it down, we absorb, we digest, we dissolve. And then the important part is when we remember, like we take the pieces and we put them back together, you know? So I could come up with a whole magical theory based on memory and remembrance, which you also talk about in your book. Tell me about memory palaces.
Sorry, tell
me about memory palaces.
Oh, my goodness gracious me.
The ars memoria.
Yes.
Because yes, so it is also a whole strand of linguistic, mnemonic, magical techniques is the memory palace, the mind palace.
Yes. Yeah. So that was a technique. Well, we know the Greeks used it. And if the Greeks used it, they obviously nicked it from somewhere else, because that's what generally was going on with that.
But as we've seen with English, that is good practice. Nicking stuff.
Oh, absolutely. Totally.
Nicking everyone's best ideas.
Yeah. So yeah, you'd have a place that you knew well, that you could walk around, and then on different objects you would place something that stimulated your memory. So you could remember lots of things in order. And obviously this is great if it's difficult to write something down.
Yes, absolutely. And so this is also, they talk about the Greeks doing it with, as you say, like, you know, building that structure in your mind and, you know, associating things. And often the associations have to have symbolic value, you know, like,
yes,
you can't just, I mean, you can do it randomly, but it's not as useful. But if you have a whole set of symbolic correspondences, then you can turn this inner memory palace into a kind of filing cabinet for everything in the world.
Yes.
Interestingly, I think that the Irish bards and druids had similar practices because, as we know, they didn't have a writing system at all. They never wrote anything down. Now, it doesn't mean they couldn't write. They were not illiterate or pre-literate. They
just didn't write things down.
No, if they wanted to write, they could use Latin and Greek letters, and they did. They totally were able. If they wanted to write certain things, they would use ohm letters, which is that, you know, that vertical line with the slashes. But that's not a writing system. That's more like a symbol system, you know, and it's very kind of basic in a sense, because you can't.
Which makes you wonder why they didn't write it down. Well, and it's quite probable, because once you write something down, it becomes fixed.
But that's always been my theory, is that like the reason they didn't write stuff down was because and I have a whole spiel about this, and I think it's in one of the podcast episodes, but the idea is that if you write something down, not only does it become fixed and it's no longer but you also you permit yourself to forget it, like phone numbers, right? Like we used to remember phone numbers. Now we've got them all in our phone, so we never remember them. And so if you put it in a book, you permit yourself to forget it, but then somebody can nick the book, or the Library of Alexandria can burn down, right? And then it's all lost. But if every member of your learned class, every bard, every druid, if each one of them is a walking library, then that means one survivor can reconstitute your culture, because they have the history. Each one of them is a library. Each one of them is a microcosmic seed of culture, a culture carrier. And also, I think the way they learned it, I think, was not as spatial. It was not as logical in the sense of mind palaces. I think it was narrative, and I think it was to do with sound. They sang songs and told stories and learned poems. And they like Homer's Odyssey, right, which was originally an oral thing. They're full of sound effects and phrases and epithets that enable you to remember, and the rhythm enables you to remember, and the patterns of sound enable you to remember. And also, they used poetic devices, symbolism and imagery, and quite obscure stuff to encode knowledge, because then if somebody captures you and tortures you, they won't understand what you tell them. Because they'll say, tell us the sort of the secrets of your tribe, tell us your wisdom. And the person will come out with this really obscure poem. And they'll say, what the hell is that? And they'll say, well, that's it. That's what we know, So it's poetry is also a way of encoding experience and encoding meaning and knowledge and wisdom that can then be unlocked by a future listener if they have the key.
I was talking to Satish Kumar. So Satish,
who is that now? I don't know.
Very famous peace activist. He used to be the editor for Resurgence magazine for a number of years, but he walked from India to Moscow, to Paris, got over to England, and then was given Bertrand Russell bought him and his walking companion a ticket on the Queen Mary to go across to America, and then he walked all the way to Washington.
Wow.
So, and he did this with no money. Amazing man. But he was originally a Jain monk. So when he was I think from the age of, about 6 to when he was in his early teens, and then he left. But he said, and this is relevant to what you were saying, he memorized probably 10,000 mantras. So that's the point. We think that people, we don't realize the extent that people could remember. But of course, there's lots of stories of storytellers being able to tell a story that they've memorized that could last for days.
Yeah. That's it, because these, and it's also, that makes me think of Fahrenheit 451 as well, right? Where books are banned and books are burned, and each person's job is to learn by heart one book, and then it will survive. I mean, there's an incredibly, I think, beautiful and moving aspect to this, which is that, like, learning things by heart, you carry them forward into the future. And so this is where the two things we're talking about, like, you must know how to learn by heart, but you also must know how to improvise and create. And that was the other aspect that the bards and the poets would learn, was to channel inspiration and to create spontaneous verse and spontaneous poems, which were seen as inspired speech, and were given a very holy sort of place in society. Like, obviously, the old texts, the traditional wisdom texts, the myths, were sacred, but it was also sacred for a poet to go up and sit on a hill all night, and then come down and say, whatever his vision had moved him to say. And I guess that's the whole ball game, isn't it? Like, how to articulate those two things.
Yes. So again, we're back to the thing that we said at the beginning, that this is a sort of a journey.
Mm.
There's no right way.
Mm.
It's your way. And as soon as you free yourself up from whether you're right, wrong, and we start getting this sort of thing of, it's not you writing the song now, get you out the way,
mm-hmm.
get your ego out the way, and let the creative thing happen.
Yeah.
And I teach a lot of kids to songwrite, and just by taking melodies and turning them around and upside down and doing, taking, and of course, cut up, which is really, I think, would sum up this book, is actually tells us a lot about us, because that's what we're doing anyway. We're taking things and juxtaposing them.
And I suppose that, for me, and I think that you'll probably agree with me here, is that it's because we are meaning-making machines. I mean, maybe not machine is the word, but we are meaning-making creatures.
Yeah.
And nothing means anything. Like, the world doesn't mean anything. It doesn't have any inherent meaning. Nothing has meaning.
No.
But for us, the only way to feel okay about life, the only way to live a good life, is to look at all these disparate elements and somehow combine them, cut them up, mix them up, mash them up, and make a narrative and say, right, this is the meaning of my life.
Exactly.
Not the meaning of life. Nobody knows that.
No.
But this is the meaning of my life.
We have to have a story.
Yeah.
We have to have a narrative. And if we don't have a narrative and we think that there's no meaning, right, we haven't made our own meaning. I think what that does is it creates an environment for people to suffer from mental illness and anxiety.
Sure. Oh, for sure. And not only that, but I think that if we are either unwilling or unaware of our ability to create our own meaning, like, of our own authorship of our own lives, well, that leaves the door open for someone else to write it for us. Like, if you don't take ownership of your authorship and say, right, I make my meaning, you're very likely to either consciously or unconsciously buy into somebody else's narrative. And that's what creates mobs and groupthink, and it's what creates oppression, basically. I mean, I think even adhering to somebody else's narrative, you are offering yourself for oppression.
Yes, you are. And
I'm not saying, oh, don't listen to anyone, of course, listen to them, but just don't swallow it whole.
This is what I said at the beginning. When people have a good idea,
exactly,
you need to start thinking, oh, all right,
yeah,
okay, let's just sort of step back a little bit.
Yeah, don't get any big ideas.
No, don't get somebody else's idea. I think that's the thing. You can take things on board and evaluate them for what you feel that they could be of worth for yourself, and just enjoy being alive.
Yeah. And I mean, I love listening to other people's stories. I love listening to other people's narratives.
Well, that's why I do that podcast,
Yes, exactly. But I am not going to let someone else dictate the meaning of my life, because to do so is to make yourself a slave of an ideology or a religion or whatever, capitalism or whatever it is. Just don't do it. Don't let anyone else tell you what your life means. But if you will take responsibility, if we will, and we do, you have to actually do it. Like, you have to actually, work on it. You have to write it. You have to make a meaning.
Yes.
You
have to live it.
Yeah. You can't just drift. You actually have to craft the thing a little bit.
Exactly.
Such is our sacred duty and our charge. On that note, I just realized that we've been talking for about an hour and a half.
We have.
Yeah, which is brilliant. Like, I mean, the thing is, this is exactly what happened when I went on your podcast. It was like, well, we didn't get to half the things we wanted to talk about. You'll have to come back. And, and then I kept coming back. So we will absolutely do the same. Like, I think that.
Yeah, that's wicked, mate.
We've only scraped the surface, and your book is absolutely fascinating. And like I said, this is not just a book. It is a cut up toolbox, manual, spell book, everything. It is an experience. It has loads of resources, loads of exercises, thought experiments, and I know also that it's got it's supported by your website. Like you can
Yes,
you can look up the stuff.
Yeah, that's right. So that's going to be something that I'm going to be adding to all the time.
Yeah, it's fantastic, because I feel like this book, like, it obviously it exists as a physical object. Now I have the ebook at the moment because mine is in the mail, as you told me.
Yes.
But this is not a book in the sense that this is not a fixed and stable object. This is a snapshot of a moment, and it will continue to evolve, and it will continue to, like, it's a sort of a snapshot, a cross section of where you are at the moment, which also includes the sort of all the layers going back. You talked about it's like onion skin, you know, going back through your life and your thought, and also having all these ramifications into other things. But I think that this book is the current coalescence of your hypersigil.
Yes.
Right.
Well put.
And maybe, you know, that would be a good place. We can pick it up next time and say, how do we make hypersigils, and what are those?
Yeah. Yeah.
We'll leave people on a cliffhanger.
Yes, cliffhanger. Do that.
If you know what hypersigils are already, then you know that what we've just been talking about is basically make your life into a hypersigil.
Exactly.
And if you don't know what hypersigils are, then meet us back here, same bat time, same bat channel, for our next installment.
Good one.
Thanks a million, Vic. This was an absolutely brilliant chat. I'm going to actually go and get to work on this on the recording immediately, because I just want to like send it to people, because I thought it was so good. Thank you so much.
That's right. And I'll catch up with you soon, because I've got to interview you.
Yes, we'll just play podcast tennis forever.
Good one.